Hey guys, what's up? This is Tyler Miller here. So as you probably read in the message, Sarah had contacted me and asked if I could help kind of keep you guys on track for the Regents exam, and if you guys could kind of piggyback off of what my students are doing. So that's kind of going to be the goal here. This is the first video for you guys, but I will end up making another video, and then you'll be up to speed with where my kids were last week. We were, I guess, about a week ahead of you guys, which isn't that bad. So we'll get caught up to where my kids are, I think, pretty shortly. But basically here I've got a video. I don't know how long this will end up being, probably about 25 minutes if I had to guess. I have usually we'll end up doing notes in a different way, but this one here is a little bit different. I had a couple weeks ago, I had my students in class read a little bit of the textbook and then kind of fill in these the chart here on this paper. You hopefully have found on the Google Classroom page that this video is posted on, hopefully found a copy of this worksheet. It's called The Great Depression, Causes and Effects. So either print that off or get that open so then you can take some notes on it, and that would be all that you need to do. But printing it off would probably be easiest. You don't need to look up anything in the textbook because that refers to my textbook in my that my students have and not anything that you guys have. So I'm basically just going to give you the answers for it all, and this is going to be a way for us to get into the beginning of this Great Depression. Mrs. Cords was telling me that you guys left off kind of right at right in the 1920s, or right at the end of the 1920s maybe. So the next step here is the Great Depression. So we'll get into that today. And then tomorrow we will get into some different responses to the Great Depression by different presidents at the time, Herbert Hoover and FDR. And then we will jump in, and then you'll be caught up actually to where the rest of my videos start up from last week that I had started with, starting with the New Deal. So that's going to kind of be the deal here. So hopefully you have that paper out, the Great Depression Causes and Effects. I've also attached my answer key that I'm going to be kind of looking on as I go, just so that I know that I'm giving you all the correct answers on this. So you can kind of mark some of those things down too, or at least consult that maybe after you've watched this video, so then you kind of have an idea of what you can write down. So we're going to go through these things one by one. I have a couple pictures to show you, not a ton today. Usually I'll have a lot more pictures to show as we go through our normal notes, but today's a little bit different. We're mostly just kind of focusing on filling in these charts. So on the front here, hopefully you've got it out by now. If you don't, you should pause the video and print it off or get it pulled up and then restart it. So starting out here, we've got the Great Depression, causes and effects. We're starting with causes. Okay, so how did this depression begin? A lot of what we're going to end up seeing is that the depression begins based on a lot of problems that were being kind of felt in the 1920s. The 1920s, as you guys probably know from what you guys learned from Mrs. Cords and Kate as well, probably. The 1920s were considered to be a time period when businesses in America are growing rapidly. There was a saying in the 1920s. This was a saying by President Calvin Coolidge, who was president from 1923 through 29. He said, and this is a quote, he said, "The chief business of the American people is business." Meaning, essentially, all that we're focused on in America is business and focused on the economy. So that's kind of the main focus for us going forward in the 1920s. Now, the problem is with the 1920s, there are a lot of kind of cracks in the foundation. Okay, imagine we're building this beautiful house in the 1920s, but we build it on this shaky foundation. Okay, sandy soil. Um, we build it on this shaky foundation, and this foundation eventually it's going to crumble. It is not the best place to build this house on. So for all the greatness that the 1920s looks like, it ends up kind of collapsing here at the end of the 1920s as we get into the Great Depression. So that's kind of a preview here. A lot of what we're talking about today actually was happening through the 1920s and is not an immediate cause of the depression. It's more of like an underlying cause, a cause that is kind of present but not necessarily felt until things get really bad, and then you feel it. So it's an underlying cause. So let's start out with farming and agriculture. Kind of a common theme here that we see with farming is the need to constantly plant more and more crops. You need to, as a farmer, make money, obviously. You need to try as hard as you can do to make money. And the problem was, and this is like a problem that's going back into the period right after the Civil War, into the late 1800s, there was farming issues because farmers were not able to charge enough money for their crops. Crop prices were falling. So with crop prices falling, farmers need to do a couple things. They need to plant more crops first, okay, so then they can sell more and make more money. They also need to buy new machinery, which will then allow them to plant more crops. Now, all of that sounds great, but if you're planting all these new crops, and if you're buying all this new machinery only to harvest and sell enough crops to make the same money that you were making before, you are going to lose a lot of money. You are going to go into debt. So if you are a farmer and having to buy all this new machinery and still barely break even, you are going to go into a lot of debt and have a hard time paying that off. So that's kind of an issue that farmers are facing at this point. Through the 1920s, they have very low demand for their crops, which might be something you could write down there. Low demand for their crops. You could write that under problems in this area. So nobody wants, people need to buy the crops, but there's so many of them because people have been over farming that nobody really is able to charge, or nobody's able to pay a fair price for them. So people are paying very low prices for the crops, and farmers need to plant a lot of them to make any money, and then that kind of compounds the issue with low demand. It puts more supply out there and decreases the demand. And then you've also got lots of debt from farm machinery. So you've got to buy the best, the biggest, the newest, and all that stuff costs money, money that they don't actually have. So farming and agriculture faces some issues here. Now, income gap between the rich and the poor. A lot of the benefits of the 1920s were felt by the richest Americans, which is potentially a problem. Okay, if you work hard for your money, kudos to you. Okay, you work hard, you should get all the money that you work hard for. At this point, though, there are a lot of people who are getting rich, and it's kind of a saying that we have: the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, meaning the income gap increases. The rich kind of start here and keep going up, and the poor kind of just keep there and go down. So eventually you end up with what was a gap here, you end up with a gap here between the rich and the poor. There are not enough consumers at this point because the poor people are getting poorer and poorer and poorer in I guess comparison. The ability for them to buy products that are made in America, the ability to buy products that they maybe could have bought before, things like washing machines, things like cars, things like vacuum cleaners, these products that were consumer goods, they do not have the ability to buy those products in any large capacity anymore because their costs are so high and their wealth is dropping. So the income gap between the rich and the poor, it's not felt immediately, but it gets felt eventually. So the rich get richer and the poor get poorer here. Now, the third one on this sheet is reliance on credit. Okay, credit is the same thing that you usually do. Most people know credit cards and have credit cards. So some of you guys probably have a credit card that you can go ahead and buy things on. Essentially with credit, how it works is you swipe your little piece of plastic at the grocery store or at Walmart or whatever. Say you're buying toilet paper for the coronavirus outbreak. You buy all this toilet paper, and essentially you're guaranteeing that you're going to pay it back eventually. You are promising that you will pay it back. The credit card companies like Visa, like Discover, like American Express, like MasterCard, all these credit card companies, they will come to you and they will request that you pay your money back if you do not. So there are, I guess it's kind of a promise. It's a pledge that yes, I will pay this back eventually. The problem is, I'm like modern day America. I'm not going to go out and buy like the nicest car. Let's say like a Lamborghini. If you know what a Lamborghini is. If you don't, do a Google search and you'll see what a Lamborghini is. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for this car. Okay, I am not going to do that because I don't have the money to buy it and I don't have the money to pay for it. Even if some bank would give me a loan to buy a Lamborghini, that would be probably the worst loan ever because I have no shot of actually paying it back. So that would be probably dumb on behalf of a bank. It would not be smart. So that is an example of if I was to buy a Lamborghini, that would be spending more money than I have, or living beyond my means is what they call that. Buying something that I have no way of being able to pay back. At this point, you have people here in America that are buying things with money that they don't have. They are spending so much money on products that they actually are never going to be able to pay off. So that is a problem at this point. It's not a problem when they initially buy them, but it's a problem when they are supposed to pay them off in 3, 4, 5 years. It's a problem. So the problem will arrive eventually. Now, let's get into the next one, the stock market speculation. Okay, stock market speculation. When we talk about the stock market and when we talk about the Great Depression, we cannot talk about either of them independent of the other. So, for example, what I mean is we can't talk about the Great Depression without mentioning the stock market. If you were to ask me what kicked off the Great Depression, I would say it was a stock market crash. It was a challenging thing that happens where people end up selling off kind of all their stocks and the stock market loses a lot of value. So we will look at that in a minute here. But at this point, through the 1920s, there are people who are kind of gambling on the stock market. If you think of a casino or a racetrack where you are able to gamble money, it's not a good idea. It's not something you should probably do. But people do it and they lose a lot of money doing it. The lottery is, I guess, technically gambling, if you think about it. So not a great idea all around, I would say. But gambling with the stock market at this point, they are trying to use the stock market to get rich. Now, I'm not sure if people have explained to you yet what the stock market is. So allow me to do that. If you already know this stuff, that's fine. Skip like a minute ahead. So the stock market here, the stock market we hear about all the time today because it's in the news a lot recently because it's dropping a lot. Basically, it is every company that is a public company. People like me own shares and pieces of a company. We are basically putting money in a company, investing in that company. If the company does really well, we make money. The company doesn't do really well, we lose money. So it's all based on the company's performance. The idea is to put your money in companies that are going to do really well, like Apple, like Tesla, like Microsoft, things like, I don't know, good companies, companies that are going to be making money for you. Okay, so that's what you try to do with the stock market. You put money into stocks, you buy a little share of a company. And by doing that, you own a piece of it and benefit when the company does really well and lose money when the company doesn't do well. So they're gambling, though, with the stock market in the 1920s. What they're doing is they are putting money into the stock market that they really don't have. They are trying to do risky things in the stock market, like investing in companies that are a little risky and maybe not solid companies, maybe companies that are going to lose money and they're not really sure. The problem is, though, it all stems from what I have written up here in green, buying on margin, which is a process that was happening in the 1920s. Essentially, what was going on here was that the stock market would allow for a normal person like me to invest in a company by only spending or by only putting down 10% of the actual cost of the stock. Let's say the stock cost $10 for a share. Okay, $10 per share. I could buy the stock on margin for $1. Okay, $1. What I would do is I would pay $1 and some other bank or loan company would give me a loan for the rest, and then I would get the stock. If the stock shot up to $20 a share rather than $10, I could sell, and then I would get all that money and I would be able to pay off the $9 that I had loaned. Then I make $11 on the whole thing. Okay, it's a great deal. Or I guess I'd make $10 on the whole thing because I originally invested $1. But it's a great deal. And at this point in the 1920s, stocks were shooting up left and right. People were making so much money on the stock market. So it was a safe bet for a lot of people. It was gambling, but it was a safe bet. So buying on margin ends up becoming an issue in 1929. 1929 was the first year of the Great Depression. There was a day in the stock market. I believe it was in October, if I'm remembering correctly. In October, there was a day when essentially it all started with one person. Nobody really knows who that person was, to my knowledge, but it all started with one person, and that one person decided, I'm not really liking how the stock market is going. There's a lot of people buying on margin. There's a lot of people who are maybe not investing money that they don't actually have. And this is kind of like a balloon. Okay, you blow up the balloon too much, the balloon pops. Okay, or you blow the bubble too much and the bubble pops. So it's kind of like that. So that one person says, you know what, I'm going to sell my stocks because I don't trust this anymore. I think we're at the point right now where I want to get out. So what happens is that one person sells their stocks and somebody next to him says, oh, hey, why is he selling his stocks? Is this a problem? Should I be worried about something? And then what they do is they sell their stocks because they say, oh, well, he's worried. Maybe I should be worried. And then next thing you know, it's a chain reaction and person after person after person after person after person, it's all trying to sell their stocks. Now, the problem is with stocks selling, a stock can only sell for the price at which somebody is willing to buy it. Okay, you own that share of a company and you need to sell it to somebody else. So if nobody wants your share of that company, you have to keep lowering your price and the stock value drops. And because of that, the value of the company drops. So essentially what was happening is everybody was trying to sell these stocks. Nobody was trying to buy them. And so what you end up with is the stock market kind of does a nosedive. Okay, it really drops drastically at this point. It drops and it loses something like 25% of the value of every company in the stock market was lost. 25%. That means if a company was worth $1 million, it's now all of a sudden worth $750,000, $750,000. It is drastic. It is extreme. It is a massive, massive loss. And if you think about it, the way to think about the stock market is that's the value of normal companies. So if you think about the value of normal companies and the value of America as a whole, the value of America as a whole drops 25%. So we lose a lot of money in this stock market. We lose a lot of money during the beginning of this Great Depression. So this kind of kicks it all off, this stock market crashing. You might think that the current day situation with the stock market is a little crazy because we've lost numbers that I didn't ever think I'd see being lost, like $2,000 or 2,000 points in a day for the Dow Jones. which, again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should just look up stock market information and figure it out, because it's helpful to know, especially for this time period in American history. So we've lost a lot of value. We've lost something like a third of our value over the last month in our stocks, and that's all because of this fear over this virus. Everybody's kind of worried about this virus. The main difference between this time period in American history, the Great Depression, and present day America and present day world, really, because this is a world situation, is that the stocks will come back. I have heard from economists, the stocks will come back by the end of the year or soon after, because this is based on a virus and not based on any underlying causes like we had with the Great Depression. I've just spent 15 minutes talking about the causes of the Great Depression and how exactly things were not exactly as great as we thought they were in the 1920s. There is not a lot of that in America today. A lot of these underlying concerns in America, they just aren't there as much as they were back then. So I think the stock market's going to come back pretty strong. Again, it's kind of just guessing, but this is a bump in the road, I guess you might say, or a pothole that you might fall into. So that's kind of the connection to today. So back onto our sheet here for causes of the Great Depression. Let's finish these two up here, and then we'll go on to the back. So bank failures, okay? This all stems from the issue with the stock market. When the stock market crashes, people had money in there, and that money essentially evaporates like that. They had money stocked up in these stocks, and they ended up getting kind of evaporated immediately. So what you end up with is people get nervous and they start panicking. Okay, it's the same fear that leads people to go to grocery stores and different places like that nowadays and buy out all the eggs and the milk and the toilet paper and all that stuff. Okay, I'm not sure why the toilet paper, but that's a question for another day, I guess. What you end up with is a panic. People go to banks and they say to these banks, I want my money out of these banks. I want my money. I need my money. My money just evaporated out of the stock market. I got to get my money because otherwise I'm not going to have enough money to live. What ends up happening is banks, if you know anything about a bank takes money in and then very quickly loans it out to other people. They do not make any money by keeping your money in a safe in the back of the bank. If you have money in a bank, it is almost positively been put somewhere else, given out to somebody for a car loan or a house loan or a business loan, something like that. The bank makes money off of that. They make more money off of sending your money out with interest in a loan than they have to pay you when you get your money, when you get your interest rates from keeping your money in the banks. So they make more money that way. So that's what they do. Banks loan their money out. So banks, when all these people show up at banks and they say, hey, where's my money? I want my money out. Banks say, wait a second, we don't have all your money here. We don't actually have enough money to pay everybody. So we have to close. So banks end up closing down here. So like I said, or I said on this sheet, if you're following along, or I guess one thing you could write down, or if you're looking at my master copy, I said people close accounts, which makes the bank fail, and then there's no money to pay people because, again, they don't have that money sitting in the back of the safe. So that is a reason why these banks end up failing. A great video clip to see for this. I don't think you've probably seen this before. You may have. Maybe, I don't know. You should look it up on YouTube. It is, you can look up, It's a Wonderful Life bank scene. It's a Wonderful Life bank scene. It is an old movie. It's a Christmas movie, but there is a scene in there where they have a run on a bank where everybody shows up at the bank at the same time asking to get their money out. And it takes place during this Great Depression. So it is a topical time period movie. So I would recommend watching that. It's worth 4 or 5 minutes of your time. And it kind of shows the struggles that people are going through at this time, and really being afraid or to be able to not pay off their loans or anything like that. Now, the last thing on the front here is the decreasing demand for products. One issue with this, okay, if I all of a sudden, as a worker or as a consumer, as somebody who makes money and spends money, okay, if I all of a sudden have lost a lot of money, I am not going to spend as much money as I may have wanted to. Okay, for example, let's just look at things in modern day America, present day. Okay, if I am sitting here and having lost a lot of money in the stock market, which may or may not have been accurate, because I do have money in the stock market and a lot of it got lost, but it'll all come back. It's okay. So if I am that person, I might be less likely to go out and buy things like, I don't know, a chainsaw, like I've been kind of thinking about buying just for personal use, not for any like horror movie use. A chainsaw to cut down trees and things with, like a new car. Okay, I'm sure that car dealerships are having a very, very slow time now, present day, because nobody's out there buying a car. The economy is not doing that great at the moment. Things are not going that great. Everybody's worried about this virus. Nobody's going out and buying a new car. So because of that, spending decreases. So that is a side effect that happens here in the Great Depression too, another cause. Okay, it's kind of an effect, but it's kind of a cause as well. This is a kind of a twofold, cause/effect both. Consumer spending ends up decreasing because the stock market fails, because these people's money or these people's finances are in turmoil. Their money is lost in these banks. They can't pay them any money. And these banks are shut down. And now all the money that they had is gone unless they had a few $100s stored under their mattress somewhere. All their money's gone. So what do? They stop spending it. They work as hard as they can and they stop spending their money on extra things. So that hurts the economy. Okay, that makes it into kind of a downward spiral. Okay, we started out up here in the 1920s, if you remember. We were really good, but then we start like spiraling downward and downward and downward and downward. We lose money on the stock market, and then our banks close, and then we stop spending as much money, and then those businesses that lost all that money in the stock market all of a sudden have to lay off people, and then the people who get laid off are all of a sudden out of more money. So it is a downward spiral, and they can't buy products, and because of that, you end up with a big issue. Okay, it is a catastrophe. This Great Depression is. It is just a horrible thing, and we need to try to pull ourselves out of that. So that's all I got by way of causes. Okay, so if you could flip over, I don't know how much of this I'm going to do. I kind of just want to do it all. You can watch this video in parts if you want to, but I'm going to post it all at the same time. So I'm at 28 minutes right now. We'll see if we can't get through all this in about 40 minutes total. I know I had said 25, but my other videos will be about 20, 25 minutes. So that's what you got to look forward to, I guess. But this one's a little longer because we got more to get through to catch up. So this backside talks about effects of the Great Depression. So how does the Great Depression affect different areas of the American public, the American people? So let's talk about employment first. Okay, I'll talk about a couple things on here. I have a couple pictures to show you. So employment. Employment, one thing that happens is unemployment rises. During the 1920s, unemployment was a very, very low 3 to 4%. So that means that 3 or 4 people out of every 100 people doesn't have a job. Now, most of the time, those people don't have jobs because they're probably looking for another job or maybe in between jobs. 3 to 4% is basically considered a good, healthy unemployment number, meaning that pretty much everybody who wants a job has a job. So that's a good number. The problem is we get to the Great Depression, and very quickly unemployment shoots up to 25%. Okay, 25%. That is 1 out of every 4 workers does not have a job and is looking for a job. So 1 out of every 4. So only 75% of the people in America are working consistently. Now, for those people who were working, almost always they had their hours cut. They had their hours cut. They might only work 4 days a week, or they might only work 3 days a week. They might only work 30 hours or 20 hours in a week instead of 45 or 50 like they were used to. They also had pay cuts. There were pay cuts, give or take, 10 to 30% during this time. So you were used to making $100 in a week or $100 every 2 weeks, which would have been really good money at the time. Maybe now you only make 60 or 70 or 80. That's less money. The belt is tightening here. You have less money to go around. You have less money to feed your families. That would lead a lot of Americans to, here's a picture that I have for you, to waiting in line in what we call bread lines. So here you have a picture of a bread line. Basically, these people in this line could not afford enough, or they did not have enough money to afford a loaf of bread, which really shows you how drastic this depression is. A loaf of bread costs nowadays like $2. $2? Who doesn't have $2 to go around? I'm sure there's people out there, but $2 to spend on a loaf of bread, it's you got to be really, really low to be able to say that you can afford that. And these people could not. This is an ironic photo because the background here is this billboard in the back here. The world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. And that would be a billboard that was put up in the 1920s. And then the reality is kind of in front of them, there's a long line of people here who are starving and don't have enough money to even buy a loaf of bread. So that is kind of a sad part about this. Now, next part here, let's talk about housing, okay? If I own a house, or let's say that I have a loan for a house, a mortgage, if I lose my job, I'm going to have a very hard time paying that off. If I lose my job, I'm going to have a very hard time paying rent on the apartment that I have. So a lot of people were kicked out of their houses at this point, evicted, didn't have any houses to stay in, or were kicked out because they couldn't pay. So poor living conditions end up starting out here. Then I also have another couple pictures here, or I guess I'll show you in my board here. There was a kind of a couple things here that I would write down. A lot of people were resorted to living in what are called shanty towns. I'm not sure if you've heard of that phrase before. Shanty town is basically like a shack, like a city that's made of a bunch of shacks. I'll show you some pictures here in a second. They got the nicknames because the president at the time in the 1920s, late 1920s and early 30s was Herbert Hoover, and the guy who had the first shot at fixing the Great Depression. So he did not do a ton to end this Great Depression. So they kind of mockingly named these shanty towns Hoovervilles, named after him. Because he didn't do a whole lot to fix them. So let me show you a couple pictures here of some Hoovervilles. So this is not a very nice place to live, but this was the reality for a lot of people. This is a Hooverville. You've got these little shacks here that people are having to live in. There's some people pictured here, but this was their life. It's made of plywood, made of cheap steel, made of newspapers, made of boxes, cardboard boxes. You've heard probably jokes about people living in cardboard boxes. People legitimately did at this point because they couldn't afford anything nicer. So here you've got this Hooverville. I've got another picture here. This picture here, a little bit more close up. There's a couple guys out in the middle here who are I guess sweeping up or cleaning up or whatever. I don't know. This is interesting. Over here, there's Kellogg's cornflakes cereal boxes or cereal bags that were cut open and placed on there to use as some sort of siding for the house, if you could even call this a house. And here you got some cheap steel over here on the left. So it's just not a nice situation. As you can probably guess, these people did not have a very high standard of living. These people's lives are not very good at this point. So that is housing issues and a real situation for a lot of people. Now, let's get into farming. Okay, we are closing out here. So farming, again, farmers are hard hit by this depression because again, they weren't doing well before the depression. We had talked about that. They were doing really, really badly. They did not even have enough money to pay off their debts. So you can imagine how bad they're doing at this point, and it is not good. What ends up happening is crop prices end up kind of tanking, dropping drastically, falling drastically during this depression as the stock market crashes and the banks are failing and all this stuff is happening. Farmers can't afford their debts, obviously. They could barely afford them beforehand, and they can't afford them now, no doubt. So there's some issues here. Farmers end up getting kicked off their farms, can't afford to keep farming. And we have a side effect that is also, pardon me, it's late at night here. It's 9 p.m. When I'm making this. There is a natural disaster that happens in our main farming area of our country that ends up causing a lot of issues for a lot of farmers. We call it the Dust Bowl. So the Dust Bowl is right there. So I write that down, and then I'll show you some pictures of the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl here, let me pull it up. The Dust Bowl here was this major shaded area. The most affected area is there in the darker, I don't even know what color that is. I'm colorblind, so I'm not good with this stuff. We're going to call this a goldish color. We're going to call it that. If it's not, it's okay, but that's what I'm calling it. So it's that color right there. Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, some of Colorado, New Mexico. But those are the hardest hit areas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. There are other affected areas that spread out this way. There's also some issues over in like Arkansas, which is just next door to Oklahoma here, facing some issues with bad farming. Basically what happened was there was over farming of the area. So the area was farmed too much. It was farmed too heavily. There was also, I guess I should say, when you farm, it takes nutrients out of the soil. So if you take nutrients out of the soil and there's no putting the nutrients back into the soil with nitrogen and other elements like that, the soil tends to like turn into, instead of like clumpy soil like you might get if you dig up in your yard or wherever. If you dig up the grass underneath, it's all clumpy and you can make kind of a ball out of it. The dirt kind of turns into this like filmy, powdery dust because there's no nutrients in it. It can't bind to anything. So it just kind of falls apart. So when you try to plant stuff in that, it doesn't go very well. There was also an issue, and this was kind of made worse by the fact that there was a drought that had happened. There was drought that was going on. There was a few seasons of very severe drought, which caused kind of issues to be compounded. So you've got this whole time period, 1930 to 1939, that the Dust Bowl is happening, and hundreds of thousands of people leave the area. Okay, and when I show you these couple pictures, I think you'd probably want to leave too. So this is a picture of a dust storm. Okay, imagine the winds blowing one day, and then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, this looks like it's a scene out of an apocalyptic movie. This looks not great. So this is a picture of a real dust storm, and I do not think I would want to be in the path of that. I think if I was these people, I'm pretty sure I would try to get inside because I don't think I'd be out there in this. Yeah, just saying. There was people who they would sit in dust storms and dust would come through, and it is really windy out in these areas. It is the Great Plains. It is windy out there. So wind just whips up these dust storms out of nowhere. People would clean their houses one day, and then the very next day, they would wake up and there'd be like an inch of dust in everything in their house because the dust had seeped in through their siding, through their windows, through the cracks in their floor. The dust seeped in and covered everything. So and then they clean it, and it happened again the next night. It was just crazy. So here's another picture. Okay, here's the aftermath of a dust storm. This does not look good. This was a car here. It is up to the hood of this car. This looks like it was a wagon. These are probably 3-foot wagon wheels. And so the dust is 3 feet high here. Okay, it is crazy how much dust gets left here. And it was unceasing, never ending. So you do the math. I think I would probably leave too. So that's what you end up with is the Dust Bowl. Now, that being said, leaving, okay, there are migrations, which is into the next number here. We are closing this out here. We should be done here in a couple minutes. Migrations. There are a number of migrants who end up leaving the area of the Dust Bowl. The hardest hit area was Oklahoma. So there are a group of immigrants, and listed on there it says Okies. There was a group of migrants, not immigrants, a group of migrants called Okies. Anybody who was a migrant from Oklahoma would be called an Okie. That was kind of a mean nickname for people from Oklahoma at the time. They didn't really like it, but that's what we remember them as, so I guess we use it now. But Okies, they ended up migrating from Oklahoma to other places to try to find work. Almost always, let me pull up my map here again. Almost always that involves going out west to Arizona, Nevada, California. What was out there was a lot of fruit groves. There was a lot of work for migrant laborers out there. So people from Oklahoma ended up going out there in large numbers. It's not the coronavirus, I promise. I'll be okay. Now, there is a famous novel that is written about this. It is called The Grapes of Wrath. It is a well-known novel. It was written by a guy named John Steinbeck. We will talk more about The Grapes of Wrath more in a notes video as we get into our notes for this section. But The Grapes of Wrath, it is written about a family who moves out west during this Dust Bowl. They start out in Oklahoma and then move out west. I had to read in high school. I didn't really like it that much. It's very long. I'm not a fan of long books. So yeah, that's that. So The Grapes of Wrath. Next up, families. Okay, we got families and minorities. Families, if you were a person who made a lot of money for your family before the Great Depression started, and if you were a person who more or less brought home the money for the family, we have a saying here, bring home the bacon. That means you're the main wage earner for your family. If you lose your job, that leads to probably a feeling of failure for you as a person. So a lot of people experience this at this time. People who had to work and couldn't because they just didn't have a job, so they didn't have any money for their families. Kids quit school to go to work. I had a great grandma who actually lived through the Great Depression, and she ended up having to quit school and pick up a job as a waitress in a diner during the middle of this Great Depression. So she had to work because her father was out of work. So it's like kids, 13. She was like 14 or 15. She had to go to work. So that was not abnormal for most families. And as a result, families have to live on smaller incomes. So if you have less money to go around, you have less money to spend, and you have to spend less money, and you have to cut back on things. So live on smaller incomes. Now, last up here, minorities. Specifically, we're going to focus with African Americans in a second. So specifically, all minorities, though, would have been the last people to be hired and the first to be fired. So what that means is basically any business owners. America still has very racist tendencies at this point in our time period in the 1920s and 30s. So they would have hired only white people first. And then if there were any jobs open after that, they would hire African Americans or other minorities, Mexican Americans, Chinese Americans, anybody like that. They would hire those people last. So last to be hired, and then first to be fired if there was any issues, if there was any cutbacks that needed to be done, if they needed to cut 10 workers, they would look around the shop, and if there were any minorities, they would cut them first. So the last to be hired, first to be fired. It's very unfortunate, but it happened, unfortunately. Now, we said that the general unemployment rate in America was 25%. For African Americans, the unemployment rate was 50%. Okay, 50. That means 1 out of every 2. Every other African American was not working at this point. So 1 out of every 2, every other one, which is crazy high. But that's, again, attributed to the racism in America. So that's a problem, but it is, I guess, going to be solved eventually. But at this point, it's a problem. So that is the issue with minorities. Now, I think I got it all done. I think I got through everything. Again, if you needed anything, you can obviously pause and rewind this video. There might be even a way to slow me down if I talk too fast. I don't think I did, but if I did, you could slow me down or replay anything that you need. We're at 45 minutes, which is way longer than any of these other videos will go. Most of the other ones will be like 25 minutes, like I said. I will come back tomorrow with talking about how the depression ends up kind of trying to be solved by the different presidents here. So that'll be kind of where we pick up tomorrow. So what you need to do, I guess, just watch this video. Obviously do anything that Mrs. Cords or I think Kate's helping you too. Anything that they might have for you to do. But hopefully this is helpful for you to hear from somebody else about kind of the deal, and hopefully this is helpful for you. Some of you specifically, I guess this is Destiny, directed straight to Destiny, and I guess to Evan. This is the first time that you're hearing me teach you in like 5 years, so that's a nice note. I guess it has been 5 years, but welcome back, even though this is not the same scenario as before. So I think that's all I've got for you. Again, I'll come back tomorrow with some more of a video, and hope this helped. And email me if you got any questions. My email's right on there in that initial announcement that's on the front page. So send me an email if you got any questions. And other than that, I will see you tomorrow. So take care. Stay safe. Don't get sick.